I think I've got quite a treat for you. It certainly was a heck of a treat for me, as a matter of fact. One of the fans of the channel decided to would like to wanted to have an exhibition of Breya on Breya, and so we ended up playing 5 games. Now I haven't checked to see if these games will bug out or not. I'm hopeful that they won't. There weren't any time twisters, which usually tend to be part of what causes the problem, but um, it's unclear since it's Magic Online, and so keep your fingers crossed. Basically, is what I'm saying, because 5 mirror match games against a very skilled opponent should be quite interesting. But we have to see if the replay works. So we'll get started in that in a moment. The other thing that came up during the conversation was with my opponent was that I hadn't really taken the time to discuss my land. I've often just kind of mentioned what I'm doing with it. You know, I'm changing this land or that. For example, Fire Islet, I assume that within the next block, they're going to release a land like this for each color. And if that is the case, this will become the blue-white land. It's the only land that I expect to change in the deck, but this one will become the blue-white land. Now that is down the road. For now, it's Fiery Islet. But I really haven't taken the time to explain why each land is in there. And every single land is carefully selected to do what it does. It is not, there isn't a single land in there that hasn't been um, theory crafted to death. And I will probably do a video on that because I think that might be interesting to you. But for now, let's just say that my opponent had, well, you'll see, but my opponent had made some adjustments, which I think in this case were adjustments in the wrong direction, and I offered my critique, not necessarily criticism, but my critique to my opponent. So hopefully if you're watching, you do go back and consider tuning your base a little bit further. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine. Brian's, for example, is off by maybe 2 to 3 lands or so. But there are a few things that you want to keep in mind, and I'll talk about that in the lands video. So let's jump right into the games, take a look, and hopefully you all enjoy this as much as I did because it was absolutely stellar fun. It brought me way, honestly, this deck reminds me of the deck from the past, and I'd often, I guess we played a few more than 5, as a matter of fact. Well, we'll run through them all. All these against Daybro 0184. So it brought me back to playing the deck, but it also brought me back to during that era. So in the 90s, roughly from approximately 95 to about 2001, 2002, the deck mirror matches were brutal and frequent and really skill testing. And it felt so good to play some games that were similar to that because um, that was, for me, that was classic. That wasn't classic Magic. That was Magic. I, for the longest time, refused to play what was called Type 2 back then. I strictly played Type 1 because Type 1 was Magic. There was no Type 1, Type 2. Type 2 was some usurper nonsense. Why would I want to play with less cards, So it was one of those deals. So once I realized it was around to stay, or probably around to stay, and I couldn't boycott it to make it go away, I just refused to play it for the most part. Eventually caving and getting a few PTQs off it, what was Type 2 and eventually extended. But man, there was no joy as sweet as the deck mirror matches, and hopefully you'll find the same joy in watching these games. So let's get started, and we'll run through these. I had some other good games here against these other folks, but I would just like to focus on the games against Daybro 0184 here. So let's get started, and hopefully, even if we do have a bugged game, that the majority will play out as they should. So let's pause for a moment. So again, it's a Breya on Breya mirror. The opponent is a fan of the channel, so I did also send the link to them to make sure they had the most current version of the list if you wanted it. And that's about all that can be said. The rest is gameplay, deck construction, and experience, which I think my opponent showed tremendous skill, but I believe I have a much greater amount of experience in this playing this deck as well as in this sort of matchup, and we'll see what you think. So I lead off with an excellent start, of course, in game one. I'm already way ahead, and I push the lead by going to get a Soul Ring. Top deck, a Seal of Cleansing here is real nice. I was thinking about copying the Soul Ring. So this was a little trick. So I actually played the Soul Ring first and then threw down the copy. My hand is actually almost completely out of gas. I need to find hand refill. I've got tons of mana in play, and I need to find it quick before my opponent can catch up, excuse me, on the board. So I play this little ploy here where I actually run out the Soul Ring and then throw the copy artifact, hoping my opponents will just assume that I want yet more mana when I don't. I absolutely want to copy the top, not only because will I be able to find more cards, get more cards in my hand through the use of the top going forward, but if I needed to become a Soul Ring, I can always activate the top to at the end of my opponent's turn, then draw it back and copy the Soul Ring on the way back down. So lucky for me, my opponent doesn't pick up on what I'm trying to do here and activated his top in response to my copy artifact. It would have set him back some, but I think in this case it actually would have been the correct play because my board, imagine how much worse I am if I can't top here. If I was stuck just top decking with no action in my hand, I'd have been in big trouble. Anyway, so we're going to play with Sensei's Divining Top a little bit. Uh-oh, hope we're not bugging out already. We might be. We'll see. I'm pretty sure we are because I'm 100% sure that right there I used Jete and yeah, I started beating my opponent down with Trinket Mage. So my opponent could seize pretty quickly here, but and I can't remember exactly what it was that I found with the top, but I think it was either mana destruction or it was an actual refill card. Um, I may have found something like Clamp and then got Breya down and clamped it, and then my opponent gave up when I drew like 6 cards and they had 2 mana or something. It was something gross, but it was actually all because Sensei's Divining Top plus the fetch land, the first 3 cards were garbage, but the fetch land got me 3 more, and then I ended up finding what I needed in there. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was critical that that happened. So funny enough, had my opponent use their top in response, I may have completely bricked. I would have bricked for the next 3 turns. And my opponent may have crawled back into the game and could have potentially won that game. So an interesting thing to consider if you ever find yourself in a similar circumstance. So no worries. We move on to game 2. Hopefully this one doesn't bug out. Same commanders, of course. So I mulligan. My first hand was way too slow. Second hand is the kind of gas we want to see, and I tuck away a card that I don't expect to be able to play. I think it was Muddle the Mixture. And hope for a land. I do find one. Unfortunately, I have to pitch a strip mine, but it's too important that I get blue on this next turn, so I give up the strip mine. But it's not that painful. If I slam Tezzeret down, I just go get Crucible. Unfortunately, my opponent takes out the Grim, doesn't take out the Mox Diamond, which is an interesting choice. I do understand it, though, and had they taken out the Mox Diamond, of course, I would have got Tezzeret here, and they would have been worse off. So it turns out that that was pretty good, but I ended up playing Narset off I top deck a 3rd land, and we able to play Narset. Narset digs out a Mana Crypt into a Vault, and now it's not feeling too great for my opponent. I go and get Skull Clamp, but Clamp here, not great in the face of a Narset. Will allow him to pressure Narset a little bit harder, but Narset was already going to be in trouble if I tried to plus it up. So on this turn, so the goal here is for me is just to protect Narset, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Steal the Mystic and take out a source of black because black is the color of tutors, and I can't take out their white, which is the color of removal. And of course, I always want to target blue. So if I could have gone for red also. That was reasonable, and I thought about it. But even if my opponent like Dak Faden's Vedalken Shackles, it's not that great here, or something along those lines. So I figured I would rather focus on black. Unfortunately, my opponent does get a polluted Delta, so it doesn't keep him shut off from black long, but I am able to set up a... Oh, I feel like we're going to bug out again. What is wrong with Magic Online? I really hope the rest of the games aren't like this, because all that work to put these games together and then have it just bug out repeatedly is semi-infuriating. Anyway, I, of course, get an uncounterable Breya here. As you can imagine, I managed to win this game. Now I was holding actually not brought back. I was holding a copy artifact, and I wait on it. And at some point there's a window, and I slam copy artifact, copying the clamp, and then I draw off of Breya tokens, and then that's 100% game over. So we move on to game 3. And I think what it is I also think that something that's causing the bug is when you get towards those last couple turns, if the opponent concedes and then closes the client, and you don't get to, like, the game doesn't proceed to an end naturally, it just gets abruptly cut off. I think the recording, I think that's where it bugs out. Um, and it bugs out a little bit early. Anyway, I had to mulligan again. I decided to keep this. I took away I took away the 3 mana card that I don't want to walk into a mana drain, but I keep Vindicate because if I lose a counter where I need a follow-up, and Vindicate will just take care of most things that could have been a problem. Had I had the Winter Orb in my opening hand, it was the first card I drew, but had I had it in my opening hand, I certainly would have mulliganed that away and just kept the 3-drop, but not an option here. So I'm playing a little draw go here and looking for an opportunity to mana drain in. Of course, if I'd known I'd get the Crypt, well, I could have gone Crypt and then the 3-drop here. It might have been all right. Still risky, though. Opponent goes for his Shackles. I just need to fuel a mana drain here, so I decide I'm going to go ahead and drain it. But it also means that I don't have to fight a pesky battle with Shackles and Breya, so I go ahead and factor Fiction off the mana. My opponent thinks hard and then gives me a split like this. I go ahead and take the Ready Confidant, losing the Skull Clamp and Light and Tutor, so that it keeps me off of getting a Enlightening Tutoring for a Necro or using Skull Clamp to draw a lot of cards, but it does give me Dark Confidant, and of course Doretti's a threat. My opponent plays out a Karn, but I'm now drawing 2 cards per turn. And, oh god, sorry for the yawning. And I'm ahead on mana, so I go ahead and just play Breya. I just want to maintain the status quo, so I kill their Hallowed Fountain, kill their Karn, and pass. I may have been better off killing the Urborg here just because Necro is a viable recovery option for my opponent, but I decided I was going to try to go after the white mana. I was trying to and keep the Urborg out, not worry too much about it. Anyway, my opponent plays a Teferi and then tucks away my a threat, but I top decked into Yogg Will, so I'm able to just replay most of what's in my graveyard and Vindicate yet another 2 mana here. My opponent actually has a Will to follow up to get back out, so their Will undoes mine to some extent, but I was able to keep a Wasteland off of mine. I go ahead and ponder and shuffle away Confidant because I feel it's too slow. Impulse instead and find this collection of cards, I think. Tell me it's not another bugged game. I hate when it stalls out. Yeah, see, so I'm certain what happened here is I took Demonic Tutor, I made a play, and then my opponent conceded. Well, I would think, but we can't say because if they concede before the game ends, you get this bugged last couple of turns. I'm pretty sure that is one of the contributors to the problem. At any rate, I don't remember for sure if it was these 4 cards or if it was what I seem to remember it was it was a Dak Faden, and I used Dak Faden and stole the Mana Crypt and then stripped away their command tower, and then my opponent scooped it up, but I don't know for sure. So anyway, unfortunately, I think we're going to get a lot of that because of the concessions on the last turn. So hopefully we'll avoid that going forward. And when it's an opponent who's a fan of the channel, I can probably request it and they'll honor it. Of course, when it's randoms, I can't do anything. Anyway, so here's another game, and I lead off with a Ponder. My opponent leads off with a Soul Ring. So luckily I'm going for a Soul Ring and a Grim Monolith. This is pretty scary. I find a Necro early, but I'm a little bit off, and I'm missing white mana. My opponent has a Sacred Foundry. Now, I was talking lands in the beginning for a very important reason, and it was this game here where my opponent goes and gets a Skull Clamp here, which I think is reasonable in order to they're trying to find blue or black mana over there. Oh, excuse me. So I just play out a Crucible and force a Lantern. It's real obvious that my opponent needs colored mana. and there's zero chance that I'm going to win this game if they find it. So I have to force the lantern and just try to stall. And I end up sacking Fiery Islet and replaying it, or Islet there, to replaying it off of the Crucible, because I'm digging for I'm digging for white, but although I do find it, I can't play it that turn because, of course, I just replayed the Fiery Islet. But the cool thing was that I had drawn the mana leak for the turn, so I was able to sack it and replay it and have 2 mana up with a leak. My opponent uses the opportunity to untap Grim Monolith and continues to pressure my life total to some degree. It's not infinite, that's for sure, and that Necro is looking worse and worse. But I decided to go for it anyway. My opponent enlightened tutors in response for a Winter Orb, realizing correctly, actually, that an unchecked Necro is a win for me. So my opponent is going to try to check my Necro with orb. So I throw away Winter Orb myself. I over Necro a little bit. I'm taking 2 per turn, which is now mounting. The damage is mounting, and I have to move at glacial pace due to Winter Orb. So yeah, it's getting a little tight. I'm juggling a lot of resources. I have to juggle mana where my opponent actually has more mana than me technically, even though they're still color screwed. But then I've got to also juggle my life total, and it's getting pretty tight. Luckily, I find a Cavern of Souls, so I'm able to play an Uncounterable Breya, which means I'm guaranteed to get some life back. But my opponent also correctly realizes that I need to protect my life total at this stage in the game, so swings in, forcing a block, which gives him 2 cards, and then is able, off of a land that they drew that turn, to Vampiric and collect a Brought Back for the turn, deciding that they want an extra sword. I think that was a little bit too ambitious. I believe the correct play there was to go get Gilded Lotus and slam it into play off the Soul Ring and the Grim Monolith. I would have mana leaked it, of course, so the brought back worked out for them, but I don't think it was the correct play. Anyway, I'm back to marshaling my resources, and I decided to take a bit of a risk here. I'm going to go for a sword. My opponent has plow or disenchant. It's going to hurt, but I'm getting too low on life, and I feel that based on just the way the flow of the game was working, that it's probably safe. After combat, I sack Breya there, and I used a fetch land this turn as well. I have Empiric Tutor. I Necro some cards into my hand, and we are bugging out. So I actually played Brought Back, and I got Breya back from my graveyard as well as my fetch land, both tapped, but it put 2 untapped Thopters into play, which gave me 3 total Thopters. And then those triple Thopters was what I wanted because I wanted multiple redundancies to deal with in case my opponent tried to equip Stoneforge. I wanted to be able to um, I wanted to have things that I could sack to kill it, and I wanted to have extra blockers in case they had like an end of turn removal and then a play. So brought back was pretty good there, but anyway, it was more. It wasn't necessarily like I'm already doing really well. I connected with a sword under Winter Orb and flipped the script on my opponent, but yeah. Anyway, bugged out, end of turn, bug happens again, so we'll move on. But that was the 8:32 game, and then we had 3 more. So we have this game here. But yeah, my opponent concedes to that strong play, and then I'm able to I mulligan into this hand here. So my opponent's got a full keep. I'm going first, so I'm already down 2 cards, and the mirror is always very painful. But I do have ways to retrieve cards, so I'm going to go ahead and make the attempt. I'm going to go for a end of turn Enlightened Tutor, so I'm down another card. Run out of Mana Crypt in just a moment and pass. During my opponent's upkeep, I'll go ahead and Mystical Teachings. And I'm going to go at Fact or Fiction and try to refill my hand. This is why Fact or Fiction's still in the deck, right? My opponent has Vandal Blast. I force, I'm down another card, but it lands, thank goodness. 1 card in hand to my opponent's 6 is not pretty, but I'm able to Fact or Fiction, and I'm offered this split, and I'll take the 3 for sandbagging a land so my opponent doesn't realize that I actually didn't need mana as badly as it looked like I might have. Excuse me. Opponent then runs out a Duretti, makes a construct, but doesn't have a way to kill Crypt immediately. And that's going to give me a little bit of time. Unfortunately, I have to use my mana as I am because I'm unwilling to waste a tithe here. And so my white mana is at risk, and my opponent actually vamps, but takes out an Underground Sea to destroy my only source of blue. And I think almost every time that's got to be correct. However, this one time, it turns out that white was the correct thing for them to kill. But I'm not going to run it into 2 blue untapped mana. I'm going to hope that my opponent sees that I have no blue and decides now's the time to tap out. And they do. So I can now run out my tithe. And that allows me to get double blue, which will set me up for that counterspell down the road. But it also sets me up for a Dak Faden. However, I decide I'm going to continue to kind of sandbag the Dak for now and just use the Deluge now because I don't get that many opportunities to use a Deluge profitably. So, and that was a really good one. And if my opponent doesn't, it has a follow-up, it may be an artifact. And if it is, then Dak Faden will be stellar. And if they have no follow-up, then I've turned the corner basically, and I've now got a really strong position with an end of turn Mystical Teachings play. So I'm going to run that out, and we're going to bug out soon, pretty clearly. Oh, that's disappointing. Yeah. Well, and then basically I run out Mystical Teachings and I go get, I want to say, what do I go get? I think I go get like Vampiric Tutor or something, and then I draw, I think I get Vampiric Tutor, and then I draw a Tezzeret, or no, I draw a Cryptic Command. I play a land and pass. My opponent runs out Mana Crypt and makes a play, and it's one of those deals where basically I'm able to use Cryptic Command to kind of like generate further and further advantage, and I keep pulling ahead, and then very quickly I get to a point where I'm able to play Breya with 2 blue up, and I do that, and then my opponent, I don't remember if it was this game or not, but I mean in short order I run out Sword of Feast and Famine, and I get it on a flyer, and we start the discard your hand, the slow grind of Disrupting Scepter in a blue on blue control match, and my opponent packs it in. So anyway, unfortunately, it was close enough to that turn where they gave up that yet again we bug out. All right, so second to last game here. I assume they're all going to be bugged. My opponent has a heck of a start. Look at this. This is nasty. And goes and gets a Factor Fiction, deciding that my play from earlier was worth mirroring, and I certainly don't. I certainly do not disagree. All right, so depending on the hand, the correct card to get there was either Factor Fiction, Mana Drain, or Force of Will, but in this case, looks good. All right, so I get a Cavern of Souls, and I decided to run out a Trinket Mage with it so that I can push this Mana Crypt, thinking my opponent really wants to Factor Fiction here. And they do. Factor Fiction in response, which makes a lot of sense, potentially finding a Force of Will. I end up stacking it, Karn. I end up stacking, Skull Clamp, Sword, Shop is what my opponent takes. Preordain, Imperial Seal, they let it go. So they've got they got the 3 for, and Sword and Clamp represent potential strength if they can connect. However, what my opponent didn't realize is that I had Karn, and I'm going to be producing blockers as well. I have a creature heavy draw, so I'm able to get Cavern of Souls running, and it's going to be very difficult for my opponent to ever connect with those cards, as you can see. So I'm going to actually just kill my Wayfarer and draw extra cards right now in case my opponent has a board clear. I won't be able to stop it, so I might as well get some cards while I can and refill my hand. Instead, my opponent tutors up a Treachery, and I remember we had a conversation where Treachery was actually not the card. I think they wanted... I think he was thinking. He said he was thinking he wanted a Talisman for red, but I in conversing, I suggested that the correct card would actually have been Gilded Lotus, and I think he agreed ultimately. But as it turned out, right there, just wasn't. It was definitely not Treachery that my opponent wanted, and so my opponent holds it here, and I can't remember exactly what happens, but there's a turn where I play Breya. leaving exactly 2 mana up. My opponent tries to Treachery the Breya, and I sack it in response. And so they don't get to untap the 5 lands, and because it's the Treachery is countered. So if the target of a spell is invalid when the spell attempts to resolve, then the spell fizzles, which is another way of saying gets countered due to rules. And when Treachery gets countered due to rules, it operates exactly the same way as if Treachery were countered from a counter spell. So the untap 5 lands clause never kicks in. Now, if Treachery had, if it were worded differently, if it says, if it said something like, as you cast Treachery, untap 5 land, you must untap 5 lands, and then period, then it would happen because it would happen as part of the cast and not part of the resolution. But because it's part of the resolution, the secondary effects don't kick in. So another example would be, if you haven't seen it before, there's a card called there's Dust to Dust, which is a white card. It's 2 white and 1 for an instant that exiles 2 artifacts, but it must have 2 targets. And then there's Ashes to Ashes, which is a black card, 2 black and 1, and it exiles 2 creatures. Ashes to Ashes, however, says you lose 5 life. So playing it, you target 2 things, you exile them both, and you lose 5 life. If one of the target's invalid and the other target's invalid as it tries to resolve, so you say you target somebody's goblin, the goblin who can sacrifice to deal point of damage to anything, and you target their goblin king who doesn't have any kind of sacking abilities. And the opponent responds by sacking the first goblin to deal 1 point of damage to you. Then Ashes to Ashes would look for that target, fail to see it, look for the Goblin King, see it, and because it still had a valid target upon resolution, it would exile the king and you'd lose 5 life plus the 1 damage you took from his goblin. But if your opponent had 2 goblins that could sacrifice, say to deal 1 point of damage to you, and they didn't understand Magic rules correctly, and so you targeted both of them. Of course, so the red deck, they want to do maximum damage to you. So they think, oh, this is great. They sack both of their creatures to deal 2 to you, and then they assume you will then take 5. What actually happens is all of your targets are illegal, so therefore the spell fizzles. It's counterspelled effectively by the rules, and so the 5 life never happens to you. So just something to keep in mind. In this case, I don't know if my opponent was aware of that or not. They may have assumed that the Treachery was going to untap the 5 lands definitely, and that's why they targeted Breya. But of course, it didn't happen, and so that was that game. And then finally, we have the final game. So sorry that the games bug at the end. It's incredibly unsatisfying when that happens. So I take a mulligan, even though I had a Necro hand with Urborg, because it was slow, and I mulligan into this fast hand, and it's a good thing I did because look at my opponent's start. Roaring out the gates. All right, I'm going to try to do something similar. And here we are with a even faster first turn than my opponent's. Awesome. All right, my opponent sacks their map, goes and gets Strip Mine. Strip Mine's not too shabby here, but I do have a Brainstorm to dig for lands, and I find some. I'm going to fetch away that plow real soon. I definitely don't want to be drawing that. I actually was thinking fetch it away, but I decided I'm going to Spellseeker it away instead. But if my opponent had a counter for Spellseeker or somehow prevented that from occurring, then I had the fetch as a backup. So I go get Vampiric Tutor, which is a little sketchy here because I can vamp for something, then tutor Mystical for something, but I wanted to hide my next play, which was this. I go get Brought Back. I want to see, I'm kind of like, I want to see how good it is, and I feel like grabbing 2 extra mana here should be really strong. But also if my opponent has removal for my Soul Ring, then it's also pretty strong. I don't see any removal forthcoming, so I decided to play the Brought Back play. So I go land, Brought Back. And then my opponent does have removal. I'm like, dang it. Kills the Soul Ring with a Disenchant. But I do get 2 lands, and I'm able to Mystical Tutor there if I want to. We are going to bug out here. Yeah, we're bugging out because this is not what happened. So my opponent played Disenchant on my Soul Ring in response to Brought Back. I had already chosen the 2 targets as the 2 fetch lands. So the Soul Ring's killed, but the 2 fetch lands jump back out. So I lose 2 mana, but I gain 2 mana, and the 2 mana I gain is actually tappable for any color. I lose 2 colorless, which was pretty cool. And I don't Mystical Tutor. I sandbag it for a little while, and I run out Breya here. Actually, no, this was the game where my opponent treachered. I run out Breya here, and then on my opponent's turn, they run out land treachery. I sack Breya in response, and the mana vault, gaining some life, or yeah, gaining life, and then tap my lantern and Mystical Tutor, and then put my opponent away. I Mystical Tutor for or maybe I didn't have the Soul Ring. Geez, I don't remember. I apologize. I think what it was is I didn't draw Teferi. I drew a land. So I didn't have the Soul Ring. I had the land. So I sack. Anyway, so 1, 2, 3, 4. That's Breya, and then I tap 2 to sack in response and prevent their treachery. And then because remember I have one more land in play. So then during my upkeep, I Mystical Tutor for Demonic. I Demonic Tutor, so I use Lantern and 2 lands, so that's 2 for Demonic. And then I have land, and remember this is a land, so 3. And of course, you should be able to figure out what I got there. Costs black, black, black. I slam Necro into play, and then my opponent's tapped out, of course, and totally off to the races. The treachery gave me the window I needed to get in the game. But as it turns out, the brought back actually gave me the mana precisely to make the play of Mystical Demonic Necro. And then everything that happens after there is just, I mean, I'm ahead on mana. I've got Necro. It's my opponent losing the game, right? So just a Necro kill. So again, I apologize that every single game bugged out, but that's Magic Online for you. It's complete dog crap. And this is also the reason why typically I don't make videos. There's such a gap because between my work, the fact that a lot of games aren't interesting, these certainly were, but then the replays failing, it is so difficult to put together videos and advertise for this company for free. They don't make it easy for me to give them free advertising. But at least I got some really good games against Daybro 0184. I look forward to the next time I have an opportunity. If anyone else on the channel is interested, you're always welcome to jump in and play. And what I've started doing is when I start a game, I'll create it. You'll see exactly what it looks like. It looks just like this. It has my Black Eyes avatar from Word of Command, and I have this warning message to anyone who should decide they would like to throw down, mainly because one thing they did do is really cool is that the comments are actually sticking from session to session, so that's really nice. I can log out, log in, and the comments still stuck there, so that's great. And then I want to give fair warning as best I'm able to my opponents that they will not be getting a friendly game of casual battle cruiser commander. They're going to get something a little bit more serious. So, and I want to try to attract the people who are interested in that sort of thing. So again, hopefully you enjoyed these games. It was fun to get a little brought back turn there, and overall it was really enjoyable. A lot of fun. So sorry for the bugs, but I think you got the gist. The thing about it is when you play these mirror matches, frequently there are key turns where the game flips, and it's very rare for the game to flip and then flip back. You will occasionally see that. Certainly when I play Brian, for example, we will have games where there's no coming back, but we will also have games where you'll see a flip in the game and then a flip the other direction, cranks you with a mind twist. You have one card in hand, cranks you with a mind twist, and just in response, you enlighten tutor for a Necro, slam a Necro. Suddenly you went from losing to winning. The opponent then responds with something, a winter orb, and then suddenly it's going the other way, and you get this back and forth struggle that's totally delightful. And we didn't get as much of that in these games, but we did have games where my opponent started out ahead or way ahead, and then I was able to turn the corner. And so we had the flips that happen in these sort of judo matches, but we didn't have the back and forth. yet, but I'm fully confident that if my opponent continues to play this type of Magic, that they will develop to the point that you would expect both the back and forth of the sort of highest level of play, as well as for me to lose games. Because when you get to a certain skill level with a strong enough deck, um, and I don't mean losing games to bad luck. I mean legit, my opponent just beats me, and that will happen. Once you get to a certain level, um, there is absolutely a uh, there's absolutely the fact that you can always win. And I felt like in all those games, my opponent could always win, but I could feel, it's hard to describe, but I could feel the weight of my experience giving me an edge that allowed me to navigate those games correctly. And so as my opponent's experience gets closer and closer, eventually more experience doesn't really count for anything once you've reached a certain threshold, or it counts for just a smidge, right? And and my opponent isn't quite there yet, but I definitely see the potential with that opponent. So very cool. Thank you very much for playing. I appreciate it if you're watching, and I appreciate the rest of you for watching and supporting the channel. And thank you very much. That's all I've got now, but I'll see you next time.